Something about the orthodoxy of the great spiritual leaders of the nation, Father Cleopa, published on December 7th, 2010 by Marine. Some time ago I was reading in the virtual environment a conversation by Father Cleopa regarding the change of the church calendar to the corrected Julian, actually Gregorian one. Because it contains many errors and false teachings, I found it necessary to make some observations on what was said, with the intention of correctly informing those who seek the truth in the cloud of lies that assail us every day. Disciple, I would like to know if there was a need to correct the old Julian calendar, because those who hold on to the old style say it shouldn't have been changed. Priest, the old calendar did not change but was corrected because it was in great need of correction. Was it really like that? From 325 to 1924, it stood unrighted. What a horror it was. Disciple, most Reverend Father, has this remaining behind the old Julian calendar been written in any book? Priest, so it is clear, beloved brother, that Christians, even from the time of the Holy Apostles, no longer adhered to the isomerism of the Julian old calendar, which, as we have seen, was lagging behind. Is that really how it looks? So the Holy Fathers of Nicaea make the first correction of the Julian calendar, just as the Holy Apostles before them did. From where and to where did the Apostles correct the Julian calendar? There is no such information anywhere. Precession is one thing, a phenomenon of objective, natural cosmic movement. Correction human work. And the isomerism of March 24th, 23, and 22, finding it 3 days before their arrival, fixes it on March 21st, where it was then. After whom, so the equinox no longer fell on March 24th, but on March 21st. Even before Sergianism, 44 BC, the phenomenon of equinoctial precession was well known, so it could easily be anticipated by astronomers. It fixes it on March 21st, where it was then. Here we have an intoxication that almost certainly came through the Gregorian channel. How could the Fathers fix the equinox on March 21st? Where does it say something like that? Those who had this reckless ambition were actually the Gregorians. Disciple, what happened with the old calendar falling behind after the first council? Priest, as you saw in Pedalion, at the place indicated that the isomerism of the Julian calendar from the year 44 before Christ until the year 325 at the time of the Holy and Great Ecumenical Council of Nicaea fell 3 days behind. The same thing happened after the First Ecumenical Council, the isomerism always falling behind. This is shown by the great scholar Nicephorus Gregoras, 1324, who says that the corrections of the Julian calendar have remained neglected and must be corrected without fail. The problem of establishing the date of Easter by Theodore M. Popescu, Orthodoxia, No. 7, 9, 1964, p. 381. You should know that in 1325, when the 1000th anniversary of the Holy and Great Ecumenical Council of Nicaea was being celebrated, the great Byzantine scholar and historian, considering it the right time for the correction he proposed, brought his project to Patriarch Isaiah, 1323 to 1324. And another great scientist, Mattei Vlastaris. Great scientist, are we playing with words again? He was a great canonist and Pascaliographer, but scientist, recognizing the correctness of Gregoras' proposal. Great intoxication. Not only did he not recognize justice, but he even fought it. The great scholar Nicephorus Gregoras. About Nicephorus Gregora we remember that he was one of the opponents of Saint Gregory Palamas in the hesychast controversy, and was finally condemned as a heretic. Regarding his calendar reform, it was in turn rejected by the traditionalist fathers like Mattei Vlastare, and then by the entire church. Having among other omissions and a calculation error, he calculated the equinox on March 19th. In addition, it was already known in the 14th century that Nicephorus Gregoras' calculation regarding the day of the vernal equinox was wrong, and therefore the Easter dates of his table were not accurate in all cases. There was therefore no lack of internal causes for the rejection of the reform, which, together with external ones, had the effect that Gregoras' table, with all the praise its author received, was never put into practice. Edited after Proferos C. Popovici. Then another great scholar, the monk Isaac Argyras, resumed his studies of the Easter problem, 1271 to 1372. He showed that the equinox is counted 7 days later, and established that this is a deviation from the decision of the Holy Council of Nicaea if, in celebrating Easter, one does not take into account the full moon that falls between March 15th and March 20th, that is, after the true equinox, and one waits for the next full moon. He demanded the correction of the calendar so that the Easter tables correspond to the astronomical dates, after Hilary of Petavius, Uraniologion, 1628, E 204. Here's how it actually was. The Paschaliographers of the 14th century. From the 14th century, we have chapter 7 of the letter P from Mattei Vlastare's alphabetical syntagma on Holy Easter. It has already been shown before that the Vlastarian calculation is no other than that of the Criteria, and that in it, both forms of the foundation are used inconsistently. In the aforementioned century, Paschaliographers knew about the proemptosis of the sun and the moon, that is, that both the equinox and the phases of the moon recede with the progression of time in the Julian calendar, falling increasingly on earlier and earlier dates of it, and that for this reason Easter, as established in the tables used by the Church, necessarily moves further and further away, both from the equinox and from the true 14th of Nisan, falling later and later in the seasons. However, some of them, such as Mattei Vlastare, are for the unaltered preservation of the Church Paschalica, and see even in the distance of Easter conditioned by proemptosis a great benefit for the piety of Christians, because the interval between the Christian and Jewish Easters becomes greater through it, and thus the apostolic ordinance of not celebrating Easter together with the Jews can be better observed. Others, however, such as Nicephorus, Gregoras, and Isaac Augerus, want a correction of the Church Paschalica, drawing everyone's attention to the errors that the Paschalica has suffered over time through proemptosis. Nicephorus Gregoras even proposes to the imperial court and the high clergy of Constantinople a paschal table corrected by him, and his initiative is praised by all. But a decision to introduce his table was not taken, and the reason for not introducing it was undoubtedly, among other things, that which also prompted Isaac Argyrus to be more reserved about the reform. The latter defends himself at the end of his letter against the accusation that he wanted a change of the Easter celebration, and states that he wrote only to show how it is impossible to compose a table that would not become erroneous again, by which words he confirms that the table proposed by Nicephorus Gregoras does not remove the evil from the root, and must in time fall into the same errors as the Paschal table used by the Church. Thus ends this reform movement without any result. Again, Georgi Gemist, Plethon 1450, was very concerned with correcting the calendar and the date of Easter. Up until now, these were learned Greeks from the East who had concerns about Easter and correcting the calendar. He heard them. Georgi Gemistos Plethon's calendar, a calendrical treatise completely different from the previous writings, was composed by Georgi Gemistos, nicknamed Plethon, Georgios Gemistos, o Eponomazomenos, Plethon 1355 to 1450. A Byzantine scholar devoted to a new mystical Platonism amalgamated with pagan theurgy, under the title Menon kai eton taxes kai emeron aparithmesis, the order of months and years and the counting days. Since this treatise does not concern our subject matter more closely, we would not have to deal with it, but since its author participated in the synods of Ferrara and Florence, 1438 to 1439, and spent time in the latter city until about 1441, where he kept in touch with the scholars of Italy and worked through philosophical discourses to broaden his Platonism, it is stated that probably his work on the calendar also became known to the West from that time, just as other knowledge of the Byzantine scholars spread after the capture of Constantinople and contributed to the idea of the reform of the calendar, initiated as early as the 13th century and first taken into deliberation at the Synod of Constanta, 1414 to 1418, to become more and more agitated. In order to form a fair judgment on the question of whether an effect like this can be attributed to Plethon's calendar, it is necessary to know the character and, to some extent, the compilation of the said calendar. It is an excerpt from the main writing of the aforementioned philosopher, Eiston Nomon Sucrafe, which, however, is known only from several fragments and other writings of his, because after his death, his fiercest opponent, George Scolariu, b. around 1400, around 1460, who after the fall of Constantinople became under the name of Gennadios, ecumenical patriarch, partially burned it for its anti-Christian content. Plethon's laws contain an entire system of doctrines deduced from Neoplatonism, by which, with the total exclusion of Christianity, the religious, moral, social, and political life of the peoples, especially the Greek people, was to be regulated in a purely pagan way. Plethon had the misguided idea that Christianity was the cause of the weakness and ultimate decline of the Greek people and the decay of the Byzantine state, and that only through a radical regeneration of the people through the reawakening of pagan Hellenism could his homeland escape the increasingly threatening destruction from the Ottoman power that lay ahead of it. It somewhat resembles the sophisms of a so-called, I say, philosopher of Cuman origin from our country. The pagan character of the entire system is also manifested in the calendar in question. This one is based on the Athenian one, and is therefore lunisolar like the latter, with the only difference that the Athenian year began with the summer solstice, while Platon places the beginning of his year at midnight after the new moon following the winter solstice. The new moon day was dedicated to Pluto, the first quarter to self-examination, the new moon to Zeus. From what has been stated, this calendar appears to be pagan in its entire being, adapted from Proferum C. Popovici. Halal references. Orthodox is really bad. In the West, many learned philosophers and astronomers, seeing the backwardness of the Julian calendar, took care of correcting it, and since this is neither the place nor the time, I will mention at least a few of them, such as C. Theodore Popescu, The Problem of Establishment, p. 382, 389. We are not interested in heretical Western scholars, but here the father sources are revealed. Heretics, Westerners, modernist professors. Priest, it is not so, beloved brother. For details, see V. Sciorghiu, Holy Easter and the Romanian Orthodox Calendar Reform, p. 74, and Constabi, Ciritescu, Pascalia, p. 50. So I have told you so many testimonies from both Eastern and Western scholars, because the calendar was truly lagging behind and it certainly had to be corrected. From these readings, not a single Orthodox patristic source. Disciple, Father, but how was the calendar correction in our church? Because those of the old style say that Patriarch Miron Christia and his followers forgot about the old order and corrupted our holy calendar and the Orthodox faith. Priest, it's not at all like what simple people say, who know neither the dogmas of the Orthodox Church nor what the calendar is. So, let's hear what the learned people say. Disciple, but how and by whom was the calendar corrected? Priest, it was not Patriarch Miron Christia who corrected the calendar, but our Orthodox Church of the East, headed by the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople and all the patriarchs of the Orthodox churches who were present there, or who sent delegates and authorized persons to sign on their behalf. They corrected the old calendar, which, as you have seen, had been left behind, as was the Pascalia within it. Disciple, but how and when was this correction made? Priest, here is how. In the year 1923, representatives of all the Orthodox churches gathered in Constantinople in a synod, there examining with the fear of God and in detail the issue of the Julian calendar and seeing that, by correcting it, no destruction is brought to the dogmas, canons of the church and the ordinances of the Holy Fathers, and that by remaining behind the calendar from March 21st to March 8th, the ordinance established by the Holy and Great Ecumenical Council of Nicaea is violated. They all decided to correct the Julian calendar and to bring the equinox from March 8th to March 21st, as the 318 Holy and Divine Fathers of Nicaea had established it during the time of the Holy and Great Emperor Constantine. This is the height of intoxication. The Pan-Orthodox Congress in Constantinople, 1923. After the death of Ecumenical Patriarch Joachim III, Meletios IV Metaxakis, a Freemason with notorious Philo-Anglican sympathies, came to the throne. The statement in question is unfortunately eminently certain, not a rumor nor gossip of the stylists. It can also be proven by documentation, for example. Image, scribd.com, orthodoxwiki.org. He convened a Pan-Orthodox Congress of sad memory in 1923. Regrettably, at the Pan-Orthodox Conference held in Constantinople in 1923, May 10th, June 8th, 1923, organized and presided over by the Patriarch of Constantinople, Meletios IV, Metaxakis, 1921 to 1923, it was decided to correct the Julian calendar in the Orthodox Church as well, eliminating the 13-day difference, and to celebrate Easter according to the new calculation of the first month after the equinox, which must be determined astronomically according to the Jerusalem meridian. The canonicity and authority of this conference are in doubt. The Patriarchate of Jerusalem refused to participate. There were no authorized representatives of the Russian, Serbian, and Bulgarian Orthodox churches. The very questions that were discussed testify to how unorthodox and uncanonical this conference was. The reform of the calendar with the recognition of the possibility of renouncing the variable cycle of holidays and even the 7-day weekly order. The permission for the ministers of the church to marry a second time, even after ordination. The reduction of fasts and church services, the expansion of ecumenical relations, etc. Fortunately, the Orthodox conscience categorically rejected such decisions, and only the new style, in its partial form, was introduced into life under pressure from outside powers. This decision, accepted by some churches, spoiled their unity with other Orthodox churches and led to serious internal disturbances, which continue to this day. The Constantinople Conference of 1923 constituted the first split within Orthodoxy in the 20th century. Patriarch Meletius IV was ready to resort to deception to achieve his anti-Orthodox goals. In his letter of July 10, 1923, he attempted to mislead Archbishop Seraphim of Finland, assuring him that the new calendar had been accepted for church use, in agreement with the general opinion and resolutions of the Orthodox Church's Patriarch Tikhon of Moscow and all Russia. Believin, 1917 to 1925, was similarly deceived. Under the false impression that the calendar reform had been accepted by the entire Orthodox Church, he published an edict in September 1923, introducing the new calendar into the jurisdiction of the Russian Church. This innovation was decisively rejected by the people. When the truth came to light, the patriarchal resolution was annulled. An equally negative attitude towards the introduction of the new style for calculating church time was also held by the synods of Russian bishops abroad, which took place in 1923, 1924, and 1925. Metropolitan Anthony Krapovitsky of Kiev, on behalf of the Russian bishops abroad, declared that the calendar reform cannot be accepted by the Russian Church, since it contradicts the holy canons and the ancient tradition of church practice consecrated by the ecumenical councils. Despite the negative reactions directed against the decisions of the 1923 Congress regarding the calendar reform, the Orthodox people of Constantinople were very indignant at this innovation, and as a result of this negative attitude, Patriarch Meletius was forced to resign. The so-called New Julian calendar was gradually accepted by many local churches. The patriarchs of Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem, in agreement with the synods of their patriarchates, also categorically rejected the new style. And since rumors and information circulated that all Orthodox churches participated in that Congress, and the resolution to change the calendar was unanimously accepted by their consensus, we will present the list of the 9 participants. Constantinople, the Freemason Meletios Metaxakis, Patriarch and President. The Metropolitan Callinicus of Cyzicus, the layman Fifth Antoniadis, Professor at the Faculty of Theology in Halki. Cyprus, Metropolitan Basil of Nicaea. Serbia, Metropolitan Gabriel of Montenegro. Milutin Milankovici, Professor of Mathematics and Physics. Greece, Metropolitan Iacobu. Romania, Archimandrite Iulius Scriban, Russian Church abroad. Borders. Archbishop Anastasius of Chisinau and Khotin, without a mandate from the Synod, which happened to be in Constantinople. The Patriarchates of Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem refused to participate. The Archbishop of Sinai and the Bulgarian Church were excluded. Apart from these aspects, it seems that the accuracy of the Gregorian calendar adopted by the Boer leaves much to be desired, as there were also opinions of astronomers that were diametrically opposed. We find such an opinion in the book of Father Arsenie Kotea. Voldurile Sphinte Noaste Bisarici de Rasarit. 5. Notice to the new calendarists. The yearbook or Julian calendar of the Romanians, Slavs, and Greeks called the Old Style should not be changed to the New Style Gregorian calendar. No, 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 and no again. The tropical year of 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, and 51.6 seconds, being the basis of the calculation that makes up the yearbook or the New Style Gregorian calendar. This calendar is erroneous, ridiculous. According to the Gregorian calendar, after 11,633 years from Christ, the Gregorians will arrive with the spring equinox on the day of the winter solstice, with the winter solstice on the day of the autumn equinox, with the autumn equinox on the day of the summer solstice, and with the summer solstice on the day of the spring equinox. Or, according to the vulgar meanings, the Annunciation will fall on Christmas Day, the Nativity of the Lord on the day of the conception of St. John, the conception of St. John on the day of the birth of St. John, and the birth of St. John on the day of the Annunciation. This mistake or error comes from the fact that the Gregorians did not take into account, and do not take into account either, the astronomical sidereal year, which is 365 days, 6 hours, 9 minutes, and 11 seconds, or the equinoctial precision, which is 58.8556 seconds, that is, 58 seconds, and the fraction 0.8556 of a second, as the Egyptians had in mind 2450 years before Jesus Christ, the Pythagoreans and Greeks 472 years before Christ, Copernicus 1453 years after Christ, Galileo 1642 years after Christ, and all ununited Romanians to this day. The yearbook or calendar of today's Romanians of 365 days and 6 hours, called the Old Style Julian calendar, is the most accurate of the equinoxes over the course of a year, from the true spring equinox to the same equinox. It, the Julian year, as a civil astronomical one at the same time, is formed by the half-sum of the tropical year with the sidereal year, plus the equinoctial precision. And here's how. Days, hours, min dry, the tropical year being 365, 548, 51.6, the sidereal year being 365, 6911, the equinoctial precision being 00, 58.8556. We have. So the Julian civil year, or the old-style calendar of the Romanians, is 365 days, not a minute, not a second, and the fraction 0.1556 of a second, which we neglect as Sosighen, neglected for the yearbook, calendar, or for the Julian civil year, or for the yearbook or the old-style calendar of the Romanians. It was and will forever remain the most correct and precise calendar year. The fraction of 0.1 to 56 of a second does not produce any other error than that precisely 555,270 years after Christ, we will be one day ahead of the astronomical year, and if we live then, with the calculation we will make 2 leap years in the last 4 years. That is, one in the year 555,270 as a correction, and another in the year 555272 as a leap year rule. And then we are once again on the true path of science, without the pressure of the pontifical bull of 1582 of Pope Gregory VIII, which confused the world, darkened it, with the erroneous new-style Gregorian calendar. The number 555,270 years is the quotient of 864,000 seconds of a day by the fraction 0.1556 of a second. So, from 864,000.1556655,269.92, or 555,270 years. So, Gregorian or new calendarists must go back 12 days if they do not want to remain ridiculous in the face of true science, unperverted, undepraved by the inquisitive pressure of the Jesuits. As Nemesentian engineer, Father Cleopas, supporter of the persecution against the old calendarists, published on February 15, 2011 by Marine, books and articles were written in praise of the Father, who was called with superlatives such as the greatest spiritual father of Romania and the like. But all the reports about him are not enough, they miss something. That something is the missionaryism of Father Cleopas in his youth. In the 1940s, he took part in the raids carried out, together with other priests of the new style and legions of gendarmes, illegally entering the homes of believers who were accused of keeping the Julian calendar, the only orthodox calendar. These things, which had absolutely nothing in common with the gentleness that the father in question otherwise preached, happened especially during the Lenten fast according to the ancient order, the old style at which time the fast, according to the new style, had already ended. Once they entered people's homes under the threat of weapons, they forced them, from young to old, to drink milk or eat the meat that these new hegemons had brought with them. The lives of the saints are full of such tactics and methods of torture. The difference is that those of old denied their pagan status when they boasted of their idols, while these, of whom we are now speaking, called themselves orthodox. The situation is strikingly similar to that reported by Saint Theodore the Studite about the Bulgarian Christians who were forced to eat meat during Lent. The difference being that in our situation, these vile persecutors called themselves orthodox. In fact, these are the lying brothers about whom St. John Jacob the Joseph warned us. In a video recording entitled Life in the Desert, still available through an internet search, the father, without hiding his satisfaction, recounts how the old-style believers from the Boroaia commune were brutally beaten, following the intervention of the local authorities of the time, who had also requested the support of those from Chernivtsi. YouTube.com. I have transcribed the text below exactly as the father expressed it, from minutes 222, 436 of the recording, skipping over the political lies, cleverly slipped between the lines, which suggest that the resistance movement of the traditionalist Orthodox in Romania was organized under the protection of the communist power at the time. A huge nonsense if we consider that the prisons were full of monks and old-style believers arrested by the same communists. Here are the anti-Christian horrors that Father Cleopa boasts about. And when our people found her, they brought her 2 elements of the gendarmes from Cernauti here. They put her in Boroaia. Are you old? Old. They were with whips, whips. And they put her about half a kilometer away from the army. Come here. He would give them a few. Are you still old? Come here so we can baptize you a second time, you know. And then what did the stylish monks do? They ran away through the forest. The police, looking for them, came across the poor old hermits. I'll tell you how they were disbanded. I caught 50 hermits here. I can tell you their names. And they said to them, "Sir, we didn't come for the calendar. We've been coming here since 20, before 20, so and so." No. And they arrested many poor people. I can almost see them when he brought 3 hermits just from Parau Draculu. That's what he calls the stream. Dubao's mound in the winter in the snow barefoot. One Timothy had a beard all the way here, from Prodromu. One Nicodemus and one, the other, Agapi. He brought him barefoot because he was old, and since the world didn't keep old, what an aberration. They were there, the poor people were barefoot. He brought him in the winter. And he beat a postmaster, one Pasca Neagu. Boys, that one died badly. I took many of them out of the forest. Immediately afterwards, the father comes with an important historical account, but unfortunately here too he does not confess the whole truth. More precisely, he says that in the forest at Movila, Louis Dubois lived 50 hermits who never kept the old calendar. What an enormity! If they had come there before 1920, when the old style was the style of the Romanian Orthodox Church, how can Father Cleopa deny the fact that those hermits followed the Julian calendar? In other words, Father Cleopa invents the Gregorian calendar in Romania a few years before it was introduced.
Și m-a luat episcopii ăștia, m-a luat în braț. Măi, nu mai pot, hai cu noi, hai, a fost acolo. O da masa la stână și o bani, o pus acolo câte bunătăți. Stâna nu-i de față. Și apoi acolo, blagosomit, o păită masă, o cântație acolo. A fost frumos, țințenia locului, la Faiana lui Ioan acolo. M-a vorbat de educația, că și-a făcut o de bordei și acolo.
Sunteți acolo singur, pusnic?
El este mai din mult, da.
Nici pusnic, nici psihiatru.
Da. Aici preasfințiți au fost pusnici mari, dar știți când i-au scos?
Da.
Ca să știți, în 936 s-a prezentat aici Ioachim Fuioagă, directorul Sfântului Cenoi, și ne-au spus la masă. Ce s-a întâmplat? 4 preoți din Rusia au trecut Nistru. În luna lui noiembrie, îmbrăcat cu hainele, cu o cutie în cap la unul. Și o strigat la santinele noastre, că Basarabia era a noastră. Nu era pe malul Nistru. Haine că muri, e frig. Eu dus săracea la pichet, eu de dacă acolo avea actele în cutie aceea în cap. Și o trăit săracea și o spus și în luce, și prigoană era atunci. Vai de mine! Până am mus 150.000 de călugări împușcați, 30.000 de preoți, 300 de episcopi, 70 de mitropoli dus în Siberia, spunea la masă, aici ne aduc aminte, vai de... Și atâtea pregoane au fost 10.000 mănăstiri și biblioteci. Stalin a făcut teologie cu Visariu Pui, la Odessa, era mare teolog. Din biserică e cel mai mare pregonitor. Da, aici măi care a fost cel mai mare teolog la noi de istorie, ca părinte Stăniloa.
Teodor Popescu.
Popescu. El a scris ca de aceea de la Nero la Stalin. Și când omnul l-a arestat și ne-a dat Ioachim. Și mai mare prigoană acum, în Rusia, cum a fost de la Nero până la Constantin cel Mare. Că atâta lume au împușcat, au omorât, au făcut. Și atunci și-au făcut stiliști cu stilul vechi, ăștia nebuniști, ca se încene la calendar. S-o trezut cu Ana Paucil la Brust. Călugărița, Maica Anastasia, le-a adus Evanghelie și vermente și cruci și icoane să facă revoluție ca să deise ei Basara. Pe Ciohar Georgescu, judan ungur, care s-a ministru de interne, l-a găsit diacon la Rădășa, cădea în biserică. Da, au intrat spionajul prin religie. Și când au găsit a noștri, au adus regimentele de jandarmi la Cernăul de aici, i-au pus la boroaie, întrebă, ești pe vei, era cu creabatele. Și s-au pus ca o jumătate de kilometru de armată. Treci pe aici, le dădea câte mai ești pe veci, treci te voi de a doua oară, știți? Sunt la stații, că au văzut că a intrat spionajul prin călugări. Și atunci și-au făcut călugări steliști, și-au fugit în pădure și poliția căutându-i pe ei, o dat de putnici vei sărați, văzând cum s-o desfințat. Eu am apucat peste 50 de putnici aici, pot să zici spun și pe nume. Și ei le-au zis, domnule, eu n-am venit pentru calendarii, noi suntem vindeți de 20, n-am zis de 20 cu tare. Nu. Și eu arestat pe mulți săraci. Parcă-i văd că nu au adus 3 putnici, tot mai de la părâul dracu, așa zice părâul. vila lui Dubău. În iarna pizapat de discurs, unul Timotei avea o bagă până aici, de la Procop. Unul Nicodem și unul, Nicodem, Timotei și cu ăsta, cu celălalt, Agape. Eu adus discurs că trebuie să pe vechi. Și de când lumea nu sună pe vechi era acolo. Discurs sărașii, iarna eu adus. Și eu bătut o șel de potul, nu Pașcaneanu. Păi, băi, așa l-au murit rău. Pe mulți o scos din pădure. Maica Zenovia era fiică de avea acte de la Carol I să stea în toate pădurile statului. Mă întrebați că mă înțeam cu oile pe acolo. Măi, Șoban, ai învățat psalteria de sus? Nu știu, numai 30 de psalmi, n-ai făcut nimic. Știam psalteria de rău, așa era pe față, ca varul și ala. 10 ucenici era la data încalțate cu ocheși, cu cojoace, cu țesuri bărbățeli, cu topoarele în mână. Când am ajuns, făcea zidul celălalt, făcea zidul cu el, făcea, aducea lemne, toate. Nu te uita la una, numai rugăciunea. Era una de la Agape veche, Magdalena, avea 86 de ani și avea 200 și mai și comanda ei în pustii. Când m-am găsit-o acolo, avea o îmboldea așa de-o prapasă mare. Cine uite numai, de un metru cu tare, Magdalena. Așa, de acolo era Isidora, Cleomida, este amante, dacă lugă. Era Pahovi din Basarabia, unde au făcut anul ăștia acum la Ciorul Tocării. Cilei și biserică, au trecut cu comanda noastră. Acolo am apucat, era un bordei, să stem un puznic, unul Teodose, din Boroiera, stat și calistrata, nu facultate. Și mai la vară era vreo 6 puznici. La Poian, la Părău Alb, am apucat 3 frați puznici, Palbu, Galacteon și Venamin. Știu saltirea pe genul, mă duceam cu oile pe acolo. Păi în Galacteon, măi, cotăcea. Te eu ca de dure la puznici și ea, când ajungi pe acolo. E starețul meu de la oi, sărac, Galacteon. Mulți puznici, era unul genat de sus al coroi, bordei jumătate afară, jumătate nu. O murit la stâna lui Codiță, tocmai la vara. Eu tot duc de acolo, săracul, nu știu, pe seară. Și luau ca avem peste 86 de ani. Acolo am îngropat. Nu știu că acolo m-am îngropat, unde am trăit. Apoi eu, când m-am luat noi cu oile, noi munții, știm ca în grădină, dădeam peste ei, pe toate. Am găsit unul, așa l-a luat secul. Tocmai la Așuta Rohrișcă, din coașe, îi zice acolo, la fagerea, către movila glodului mare. Când ajungeam cu oile la dânsul, așa se uita oile la ei și când nu bătea la nas. Dar nu vorbea. Și trecând merem cu oile, numai să-l găsesc mort. Uite așa pe o șoartă. Am ieșit la mănăstire.